Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. My name is Barish Chaudhary. I'm the regional facilitator for Friends of the Earth Asia Pacific. And we've organized this webinar, this very important topic today on imperialism and its connections to uh, environmental justice in the region. And I think this is a very timely webinar, and we have a really good list out. So we're looking forward to the conversation. I'm not going to take up too much time and pass over instead to our moderator for the day, Kirtana Chandrasekaran, who's the International Program Coordinator on Climate Justice and Energy for Friends of the Earth International. And she will introduce the rest of the speakers and kick us off. So, Kirtana, over to you.
Thanks, Barish. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Very warm welcome to our webinar on imperialism, war and environmental destruction, and Asia-Pacific perspective. I'm Kirtana Chandrasekaran from Friends of the Earth International, and I will moderate this session on behalf of to introduce the Asia Pacific speakers. Just one housekeeping point at the start. This webinar is being recorded. So if you prefer to not be on camera, then please feel free to keep it off. Or if you have any concerns, please send one of us a message in the chat or for any reason. But otherwise, that's just to let you know about that. The webinar is planned for about an hour and a half. We have up to 2 hours, but we will not keep you that long. We have presentations for about an hour, and then we hope to have enough time as well for some contributions from all of you. And during the presentations, if anybody has questions or comments they really want to talk about, please do put it in the chat as you think about it. We will be monitoring the chat, and we can also bring it up again. If there are any burning questions for the speakers, we can always ask it at the time immediately after the presentations or open for discussion at the very end. So I hope that's okay. We have a really fantastic lineup of speakers today. So we will have, I will do a short introduction of the perspective of Friends of the Earth International at the start. And then we move on to, I won't introduce all the speakers just now, but to give you an idea of how the webinar will go, we have an introduction first from Minaji from Malaysia, Friends of the Earth Malaysia, who will tell us a little bit of a historical perspective of imperialism in the Asia-Pacific region, but also as a concept, and then bring us up to the present day about how it operates in different spheres, in militarism, in military spending, and in trade relations specifically. We then will move on to Russia, who will give us an update on the ongoing genocide that's happening and the updates from the region. And then we have three kind of sub-regional perspectives from South Asia, from Southeast Asia, and from the Pacific, which, as we all know, when we say Asia Pacific, it includes, almost over 1 billion people, right? And it's a very diverse region. So we want to really get into drill down into how the different sub-regions are being affected, but also different takes on the perspectives. So on feminist perspective, for example, on imperialism. So we have all that to come. So I hope you are ready. So first, just to give you a quick background of Friends of the Earth International's take on the kind of rise and escalation that we are seeing today on imperialism and militarism. And many of us, I'm sure, are wondering, how is it possible? You know, just in the last week, we have seen over 400 peaceful activists from the Global Sumud Flotilla who I'm sure all of you have been following, have been detained, subject to unspeakable brutalities, just which is all over the media and complete impunity. But behind that, we know that there has been decades of 10,000 plus Palestinian in prison, including children, thousands and thousands of children. The unspeakable brutality of the genocide, ongoing genocide, wars in the region, of sanctions, which, economic sanctions, global economic sanctions, unilateral sanctions from some of the imperialist countries. That, for example, the medical journal Lancet has said, they have been responsible for 38 million deaths. So things that, are supposed to be diplomatic, what they call diplomatic resolutions, are not. They are tools of imperialism. So as Friends of the Earth International, we have always said that environmental justice requires us to oppose imperialism, militarism, racism, patriarchy, and colonialism. Because these things work in a systemic way together. And we know that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? That's what Martin Luther King said. And it's only by standing together in international solidarity can all the oppressed peoples of the world, people oppressed by patriarchy, by racism, by imperialism, gain their liberation. But there are other reasons for this. Of course, we know that militarism and war is a key reason for environmental degradation, as we see now, the devastation of the world for many, many years. But imperialism itself as well is a method and a tool of the capitalist world system, which enables profits, unchecked profits, growth, consumption, economic and corporate power in a few core countries, but that is based on the absolute subjugation, military subjugation, political subjugation, economic subjugation of to the rest of the world, which extracts billions in materials, in labor, in economic value from around the world. We have studies that show that the global north has appropriated 12 billion tons of raw material equivalents, millions of hectares of land. And we see this happening. We've seen this happening historically in the oil wars of the 90s. We see it happening again now, and it's happening in Iran, in Venezuela. But we also see it as we know that this is the reason why, this is the fundamental reason why we see this kind of very brutal subjugation of any movements in the world for political liberation, but also for economic independence. We see this happening now in Palestine, of course, over the last many, many years, in Cuba, and in many other places. And the reason for this is this need for this endless accumulation of resources for profits. But we see this across also now in this so-called green transition, where countries aiming to achieve 1.5 degrees and reduce their emissions. But we can see it in every sphere where historical polluters are relying on colonial mechanisms like carbon markets to achieve their emissions reductions. We see this in their new scramble for critical minerals to power their green capitalist future, their future of AI, but the future of which resurgence of militarism to protect themselves, and their access to resources in the face of climate chaos and destruction. So we know that all these, for us, environmental justice is very closely tied up to our analysis of the drivers of what we need to overcome in the world. But we are also in solidarity with all the countless powerful movements for liberation that are happening currently in the world that we see. So it's not all doom and gloom. We see these movements in Palestine where the peoples have been resisting for decades, and we have this incredible global movement of solidarity with Palestine. We see it in West Africa. We see it in Cuba, and we see it within all our countries. Within each of our countries, there are global movements of peasants, of fishers, of indigenous peoples who are resisting these kind of imperialist threats. So that is why we, as Friends of the Earth International, believe that at this moment in time, the resurgence of militarism is an existential threat to all of us. Its attempt to lock in control to maintain the inequity and overconsumption of energy and resources, its diversion of trillions on public finance into war, while many on the streets struggle to access basic health, housing, or food, and so many other things, is a key topic that we need to face, that we need to understand as global movements for justice. We need to work together. And this webinar attempts to do that, but with the lens of the Asia-Pacific region. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who I'm sure is very well known to all of you, Meena Raman, Meena Ji to some of us, who is the president of Sabat Alam Malaysia, Friends of the Earth Malaysia. Meena Ji, please.
Thank you very much, Kirtana. You actually have said everything already. So thank you for that introduction. Thank you to APEC for inviting me. Basically, the issue that we are at the moment combating, and we are seeing for the first time in many of our lifetimes, the way in which the United States administration is behaving with complete impunity and might in violation of international law, and together with the Israeli regime. And I'm sure Rasha will have a lot to say about this. As Kirtana has rightly pointed out, imperialism is not a relic of the past. It is a living system of domination that shapes our world today. To counter it, we must understand its roots, its evolution, and the current forms, and so that we can stand together in resistance. Now, in historical terms, we all know how the United States, for instance, expanded the concept of manifest destiny. Basically, the hegemon was with the slogan and agenda of grabbing lands from indigenous peoples, destroying them, and expanding them. All this sounds very familiar because we still see this happening, particularly right now in the Palestinian territories. Now, the 1898 Spanish-American War marked America's leap into overseas empire. Until today, we have the ongoing threat of invasion of Cuba. We saw what happened in Venezuela. And in our own part of the world, in the Philippines, how the Philippines has been a colony of the American empire. So the Cold War imperialism was another facet of what was happening. And what this was that the Cold War was framed as a battle of freedom, which means capitalism, versus communism. But beneath the rhetoric lay the coups, the manifest number of coups that happened when leaders were democratically elected, who were overthrown, the proxy wars, and the economic chains on many of our countries. Even in Iran, right now we have the Iranian fight that's going on. We know from the Americas, in Central America and in Latin America, democracies overturned by the CIA-backed coups. And then in our own region, we've seen the Vietnam War, and it was amazing that the Viet Cong in Vietnam defeated the mighty US due to the uprising, particularly of American peoples themselves. And then we also know that through the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the structural adjustment programs, which forced nations into dependency. So economic imperialism became as powerful as military might, and trade agreements furthered that agenda. I'll talk more about it in a short while. So our economies were very much shaped to serve the colonial political independence, but we were never, ever free to chart our own courses. And even if we tried, you will have regime change, you will have coup d'etats taking place in your country. And I just wanted to also what's happening in the, although we're talking about the Asia-Pacific region right now, the big Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the big critical minerals fight that's also happening in there, only to point out that the democratically elected Patrice Lumumba, who was assassinated by the powers that be. So anytime that we have our own independent path, there is never stability because regime change is the agenda. Also, on the cultural side, our cultures are overshadowed. Local traditions and indigenous knowledge are erased under the weight of Western consumerism. We as environmental groups cannot forget this. The narratives of development often mean surrendering our own solutions to imported models of development that fail our people. And perhaps, and most urgently, as mentioned by Kirtana already, the environment is sacrificed with land grabs, with extractive projects, and the militarization worsens the ecological crisis. And those of us in the global south who contribute the least to global emissions of greenhouse gases, we face the most impact from climate disasters, as we all know, from floods, droughts, rising seas, and so on. And these are all on top of the imperial system, which is built on exploitation. This is the real lived reality of imperialism. It is not history, it is here and now. And furthermore, this is why the resistance is not optional. We have to continue to resist imperialism if we have any chance of survival. And it is a fight for sovereignty, it's a fight for justice, and it's a fight to build a future of our own terms. And before I get into the trade regimes and extraction, just to put the context into the global military expenditures, which are happening right now. With the Donald Trump administration recently in power, and before that even, in 2024, you have global military expenditure reaching $2.7 trillion, which was up 9.4% from 2023. This accounts for 2.5% of global GDP, and the US was by far the largest spender, accounting for close to $1 trillion, or 37% of all global military expenditure. And this is also up in 2025 and also going to be up in 2026, where we see an all-time high. And you already know that US President Donald Trump has been pushing the release of more money to the military budget of $1.5 trillion. Now, this is also the case for NATO countries. Their military budgets have gone up also. And this is really close to 1.5 to 2% of world GDP. So it's a massive amount of money. And the military spending and militarization reinforces the existing crises, as I've mentioned. And what has not taken into account, of course, is the global greenhouse gas emissions by militaries, which is around 5.5% of total global emissions. But this is not counted into the greenhouse gas emissions. Military spending alone relies on non-renewable resources. It includes rare earths. Many of our countries are targeted for that. It exploits communities, of course, and it leads to greater conflict over resources. So the military-industrial complex is a huge machinery of corporate power that we need to tackle. Investments in new military technologies, they are leading an increasingly dangerous and less controlled warfare. Now, you have ways in which wars are fought are changing. They are expanding into unknown territories with the use of drone warfare, with AI technologies and so on. And we see the experiment taking place at large scale in Palestine and Iran. New forms of war, artificial intelligence integration into weapons. This is something that we have to really tackle head on, removing human oversight and responsibility. And this is in violation of international law. Just to also say, the US military-industrial complex. This is really key to understand, dominated by a handful of giant defense contractors, from Lockheed Martin to Boeing to Northrop to Raytheon, General Dynamics, so on and so forth, who collectively receive the majority of the Pentagon contracts. And these firms supply aircraft, missiles, ships, and so on and so forth. And they influence the US foreign policy and military spending. That is why we need to look at the military-industrial complex. The concentration of power, over half of the Pentagon discretionary spending going into 5 companies, which are receiving more than twice the funding allocated to diplomacy and international aid. Policy influence. These corporations lobby heavily, shaping defense budgets and foreign policy priorities. And in fact, one of the previous presidents of the US, Eisenhower, who termed the military-industrial complex, he expressed concern that it has unwarranted influence over the foreign policy, and as critics argued, it perpetuates endless wars and undermines democratic oversight. So the mere existence of this military and industrial complex to make money out of wars, so it's perpetual wars, and this is really what is most concerning. Now, coming to the trade regimes, I have to speed up on this, I know, but this is the latest. We know for that the trade agreements, whether they're bilateral investment treaties or bilateral trade agreements or the World Trade Agreements, of course, the whole idea is corporate control. We know about the investor-state dispute settlement, where corporations are allowed to sue governments for protecting workers, indigenous rights, and environment. Friends of the Earth, there's a strong work on this area, we know. Now, the latest US behavior, Donald Trump's so-called Liberation Day, and the tariff threats, and the actual embarking of weapons of trade through the use of what's called the Agreement on Reciprocal Tariffs. I just want to focus on this a little bit because this includes countries in the Asia-Pacific region of Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and even Bangladesh. So the Agreement on Reciprocal Tariffs is nothing but non-reciprocal. It's one-sided. For instance, in Malaysia, under the agreement, the Malaysian government is supposed to buy $1.5 billion of goods from the US, which includes oil and gas. Can you imagine? The agreement also is for the investments in our countries, are also to create jobs in the US through our investments, which is ridiculous. And the hundreds and millions of fiscal revenue, which is being given up by not taxing US companies. Requirements on technology transfer, which we are not allowed to do on US companies. We cannot require them to do anything for the benefit of our country, including our food safety, our health standards, all this sacrifice to US standards, which is actually non-standards now. The imposition of US security sanctions based on US national security interests, not Malaysia's security interests, but US interests. So it's basically a tool of foreign policy autonomy being dictated by the United States and forced through geopolitical and geoeconomic alignment with the US through the trade agreements. It prioritizes US participation in our critical minerals sector. It's up to the US to decide whether Malaysia has fulfilled their obligations to their satisfaction. So this is really institutionalized geopolitical pressure. Luckily for Malaysia, the US Supreme Court ruling, which made the Trump tariffs illegal, gave a reason to Malaysia for not ratifying. We had a hard time in Malaysia to influence our government not to ratify, but due to this US Supreme Court case, that was better. However, this is becoming a problem for other countries, including in Indonesia, in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, where you have the ARTs being challenged in domestic courts, but the governments are giving in under pressure, and this is really coercion at the highest point. Also on digital trade, I mentioned the use of AI and digital trade has become an important tool, which is data colonialism. It is a new domain. It's data flows, intellectual property, digital infrastructure, all captured by the external powers and also imposed through the WTO. So these are very many new trade agreements and new horizons of AI control that we are now facing, including the regulation on critical minerals. And many of us are actually following this, including in Malaysia, where we have one of our Australian companies, which is based in Malaysia, signing a deal with the United States to supply the Pentagon with rare earth materials, which we are fighting. So you can see that we need to work on many new fronts, which we are confronted with. And we have to oppose militarism. We have to work with those coalitions are pushing for peace. And these are the new battlegrounds of imperialism, which we have to be much more louder And we have to fight this on many scales, not only at the national and regional level, but an international scale, so that the only way possible is for resistance and to counter imperialism in the current time, and to build the future on our own terms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minaji. So I think that was a lot packed into 12 minutes, but actually really shows us the depth and spread of how the systems are working together in the economic sphere, in the military sphere, in the political sphere, but also in the cultural sphere, and sometimes infiltrating, our own countries of the global south, and how they are organizing their economies to serve, to not serve their own people, but actually serve these commodities for export and, these trades. So it's through coercion, it's through many means. I mean, there are so many things I think we could pick up from Minaji's presentation, but just one thing I think that's also really important that you touched upon, Minaji, is that we have now, this kind of flagrant violation of international law, the United Nations Charter, in everything that's happening now. But then beyond that, we also know in the very formation of some of the global political agreements, and especially economic agreements, trade agreements, bilateral through the WTO, but the organizations of the global financial system, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, that the way the systems have been set up, in fact, is also to serve the imperial cause. So I think what we really need to understand as movements who oppose these as justice movements, what we call for in this kind of new international order, a new international economic order, a new people's multilateralism, what we want to build from below, that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And that is really something for us to build all together. So with that, I want to move on to our next speaker, Rasha Abudeh. Rasha is our sister, our comrade. I don't think there's anything that I could say to kind of introduce the depth of their love and their incredible work that they're doing under these circumstances that we all know, which I will not have to repeat here. So Rasha, over to you.
Thank you, Kirtana, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for giving me this important space, and for all the solidarity represented in this webinar and represented always through our comrades in Friends of the Earth International and all of our allies. So I'm speaking today from Palestine, where the environmental destruction is not accidental collateral damage of war, but it's part of a broader system of militarization, siege, and settler colonial control. Today, I will briefly present findings from a major environmental assessment. It's titled War and Geos, the Environmental Legacies of Militarism, and it's conducted through collaboration with Newcastle University, involving environmental professionals, researchers, engineers, GIS specialists, and field teams on the ground. What makes this research significant is that it's produced during the war. So during the active war conditions, this research was being done on the ground. Environmental scientists and field teams continued documenting the environmental destruction while facing bombardment, while facing displacement, infrastructure collapse, and severe access restrictions. The research combines satellite imagery, GIS spatial analysis, field observations, and lab testing, and environmental sampling conducted under international recognized scientific protocols. So this is therefore a scientific environmental record of ecological collapse during war. The central finding of this research is that Gaza's environmental systems did not fail separately. They collapsed altogether. When energy systems collapsed, water systems failed. And when water and wastewater systems failed, soils and groundwater became contaminated. When agricultural lands were destroyed, the food systems collapsed. Militarization destroys not only infrastructure, but the ecological foundations necessary for people's survival. So the report of this research documents how Gaza's environmental crisis rapidly became systemic. First, the collapse of water and wastewater systems. So Gaza even entered the war already facing severe environmental pressure due to years of blockade and infrastructural restrictions. But after October 2023, the destruction intensified dramatically. Water access dropped to as little as 3 liters per person per day, far below the minimum humanitarian survival standards. Now, wastewater treatment plants stopped functioning. More than 100 wastewater ponds formed across Gaza after pumping stations and treatment facilities collapsed. Raw sewage flooded neighborhoods, flooded displacement camps, agricultural land, and eventually the Mediterranean Sea. Municipal wells became contaminated with E. coli and sewage infiltration. And when we say E. coli, some people are unaware that this type of bacteria is only present in the waste, like in our human waste. So you can imagine that this got to drinking water through the sewage, filtrating through the sandus and the porous soil of Gaza into the municipal wells. So families also lived surrounded by wastewater flowing between tents and residential areas. It became clear that this environmental collapse is directly linked to the destruction of infrastructure, electricity cuts, fuel denial, and ongoing military attacks. The second major finding concerns soil destruction, agriculture, and eventually food systems. Agricultural land in Gaza was heavily damaged through bombardment, bulldozing, wastewater flooding, debris accumulation, and displacement. So this report documented the widespread destruction of cropland, irrigation wells, and greenhouses. But importantly, this report also includes laboratory analysis confirming chemical alteration and contamination of soils. Researchers detected elevated levels of hazardous elements and contamination patterns linked to destroyed infrastructure, waste burning, sewage infiltration, and military destruction. The plant samples also showed contamination transfer from the soil into the vegetation, creating long-term risks for safety, for food safety, and agricultural recovery. This means that the environmental damage is not only immediate. It threatens the long-term ability of Palestinian communities to sustain agriculture, food sovereignty, and ecological recovery. The report also documents severe marine and coastal collapse. Gaza's coastline became the final sink for sewage, for contaminated runoff, debris, and waste. So the report estimates that between 90,000 and 130,000 cubic meters of untreated sewage were entering the Mediterranean daily. Marine ecosystems deteriorated rapidly. Fishing livelihoods collapsed. Coastal ecosystems that once supported biodiversity and community life became heavily contaminated and unsafe. Importantly, the pollution spread beyond Gaza itself through Mediterranean currents, demonstrating that war-driven environmental destruction does not remain confined within political borders. So the plan was to destroy Gaza, but when we talk about the environment, you cannot limit it with borders. The environmental destruction of Gaza itself did not remain within Gaza. Through the Mediterranean currents, it went far beyond. Another critical dimension documented in this report is the displacement and the environmental violence. More than 1.7 million Palestinians were displaced into increasingly compressed areas lacking safe water, sanitation, waste management, and environmental protection. Displacement camps became zones of environmental overload. Families lived surrounded by sewage, surrounded by burning waste, contaminated water, dust, rubble, toxic air. Children eventually developed skin infections from contaminated sand and wastewater exposure. The waste accumulated beside tents, and the smoke from burning this waste to try to find a solution for all of this waste, some of them tried to burn it. So the smoke from burning this waste mixed with the sewage odors and demolition dust. In this context, displacement itself became an environmental hazard and a mechanism of ecological harm. The report also highlights the collapse of interconnected systems essential for life. The destruction of the energy system did not only mean lack of electricity. It means wells stopped from functioning, desalination plants stopped operating, wastewater treatment collapsed. Hospitals lost refrigeration and sterilization capacity and essential services. Environmental collapse, therefore, became inseparable from public health collapse and humanitarian collapse. The report concludes that the scale of persistence of environmental destruction in Gaza raised serious legal and ethical concerns under international humanitarian law and emerging ecocide frameworks. Water systems, food systems, sanitation infrastructure, agricultural land, and ecosystems are all indispensable for civilian survival. Their destruction creates long-term environmental harm that extends far beyond immediate military operations. The report, therefore, frames environmental devastation not simply as damage to nature, but as destruction affecting the conditions necessary for human life itself. And this is important for all of us here. Palestine is not isolated from broader global systems. Mina already talked about this and explained that we're all part of a huge system. So we're not isolated from this global system. Across many regions represented in this webinar with us today, communities are confronting militarization, extraction, displacement, environmental destruction, and unequal access to resources. Palestine represents an intensified example of how imperialism and militarization produced ecological devastation alongside humanitarian catastrophe. But despite these conditions, the Palestinian communities, the researchers, the environmental workers, municipalities, civil society organizations continue documenting environmental harm and continue defending their communities and continue advocating for environmental justice. This work itself, for us, is a form of resistance. Environmental justice in Palestine cannot be separated from questions of sovereignty, dignity, survival, and collective liberation. And climate justice cannot coexist with militarization and siege. It cannot coexist with siege. It cannot coexist with occupation. It cannot coexist with militarization. Environmental protection cannot exist under systems that systematically destroy civilian infrastructure and ecological systems. Ecological recovery requires justice, accountability, and the protection of civilian life. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasha. That is an incredible report. I think we would all love to see it. And also, just as you said, to hear about the ongoing work to even document this kind of this level of what is happening under the conditions that you say, that itself is a movement for justice, right? That itself is requires all our solidarity. And thank you for all the work that you do. And I think, I mean, again, there are so many things that I cannot pick up and repeat all of them. But as we all know, I think what we see happening in Palestine is a microcosm of everything we see happening. We are all the interconnected systems of imperialism and militarism, and also the interconnection to all the struggles that our people's movements are fighting on the ground, where there are people deeply connected to their lands, deeply connected to their food sovereignty, deeply connected to their coastlines, and in that situation, what imperialism, corporate power, colonialism does is to make the conditions for life for these people impossible. And that is what Rasha said. And I really, I think that really spoke to me, because as justice movements for the world, we stand for life. That is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for our life, for our very existence and the existence of all our peoples. And the only hope that I take is that, I think no more is all the gaslighting and lies that's being produced by the global media, by the Western media, by Western governments. It's not fooling people anymore. That, it's kind of this incongruence where even now you see in the belly of the beast, as we say in the US, that the people's perception of the resistance of Palestine is much more positive about the situation has really changed, and that is we will have victory, and Palestine will be free. Thank you, Rasha, for that. So I want to move on now after these two to some more sub-regional perspectives. So I move on now to Vijayan MJ, who will speak, who is from the Pakistan India People's Forum. He's a policy analyst, a writer, an activist. He's been working with the Pakistan Indian People's Forum for Peace and Democracy for many years. He's also a founding member of Friends of the Earth India and still part of the executive board, the Majalis of Friends of the Earth Asia Pacific. And Vijayan, on to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirtana, and I thank Friends of the FoEI Asia Pacific region for allowing us to bring on our perspectives onto the table here. Thanks to both Meena and Rasha. It was excellent to hear both the analysis and what is happening in the ground. I've kind of tried to place my paper, because when you're actually trying to speak off the hat, I've realized that one is actually getting extremely angered, because what is happening is it causes anguish, it causes deep depression deep within all of us, and it is to fight that we must engage a lot more with what has been happening. So empire, oil, and ecocide is a framework that I've given, how the war on West Asia is burning the global south. So as we all know, the war did not begin in a vacuum, it began in Gaza. For nearly 2 years, Palestine has been devastated by Israel's imperial and Zionist war machine, backed politically, militarily, and financially by the United States. Gaza has been reduced to rubble, civilians have been starved, displaced, and buried under a system that speaks the language of security while practicing the politics of annihilation. Then the war expanded. As we all know, 28th of February was no coincidence. The United States and Israel launched a coordinated strike on Iran. Iran's leadership was targeted, and almost an attempt was made to wipe it out. Ayatollah Khamenei Sahib was killed. This was not merely a military operation. It was a symbolic assault for many on a civilization, a political order, and a historical memory. To kill a Shia supreme leader in this manner was directly to invoke Karbala. For those who know the cultural meaning of Karbala, to the Shia community, this was a complete 21st century remaking of the Karbala, the sacrifice of Hussein. Empires often believe assassinations create an atmosphere that ends history. But more often, they actually deepen history, not to the liking of the oppressor, but to the resistance and the resilience and the defiance of the oppressed. So the war waged by the US and Israel is actually in a long series of wars justified in the name of freedom and democracy, but carried out through naked militarism. And that's the second point that I wanted to bring in. So this is not simply a regional war. It is already a global war whose price is being paid by poor countries and ordinary people across the world. That is the central argument, that imperial wars are never paid for only where they are fought. The bombs fall in Gaza, Tehran, and the Gulf, but the invoice reaches Delhi, Dhaka, Colombo, Karachi, Nairobi, Jakarta, Manila, and many, many more in the global south. So, a very important recent analysis exposed the contradiction at the heart of this energy imperialism. For years, United States pressured India to reduce, and this I'm citing as an example. The US pressured India to reduce Russian oil imports in the name of sanctions and rules-based order. But once the Iran war destabilized the Strait of Hormuz and threatened global oil flows, Washington quietly relaxed restrictions and permitted Indian refiners to purchase Russian crude again in order to stabilize markets. This reveals a deeper logic of imperial power and energy imperialism. The global north wants to decide who the global south trades with, what oil it buys, which sanctions it obeys, and even what diplomacy it is permitted to pursue. But when Western inflation and energy securities are threatened, the rules suddenly change. Sanctions and energy diplomacy are not neutral moral instruments. They are geopolitical tools. The global south is expected to absorb the inflation, debt, austerity, I'll come to that soon, and instability created elsewhere. This is why the question of Palestine, Iran, and West Asia is not a foreign policy issue for South Asia. It is about food, fuel, debt, labor, climate, and survival itself. So when the supply chain collapses, it is not Washington or Brussels that suffers it first. It is the working people of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The Strait of Hormuz has now become the central artery of this crisis. It was not before the war, though. Nearly 1/5 of global petroleum liquids consumption passes through this narrow waterway, making it the world's most important oil transit choke point. So Reuters, Associated Press, etc., have reported that the war and disruptions around Hormuz pushed India to raise petrol and diesel prices by roughly about 10% by liter. Commercial cooking gas prices have risen much further. This is where war enters everyday life. It enters the kitchen, the bus fare, the school fee, and the price of vegetables. It enters the lives of fisher people, farmers, migrant laborers, delivery workers, transport workers, and small eateries surviving on shrinking margins. So in India, for example, if you look at it, the small eateries shut down in the last 2 months has been just really sad, because there are lakhs, there are hundred thousands of people who are dependent on these for both livelihood as well as for food requirements for migrant workers especially. So India imports about 85% of its oil. So when prices rise, it is not the rich who suffer first. As we all know, this is a global reality now. It is the worker who cannot work from home, the fisher who needs the diesel and to get out to the sea or the river, the farmer whose fertilizer cost rises, the woman trying to feed a household under inflation. And here lies the cruelty of our government's response, or the Modi government's response. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has urged Indians to conserve fuel, reduce imports, avoid gold purchases, and adopt work from home practices as patriotic austerity measures during this crisis. But who can actually work from home in a country like India, or in the global south for that matter? Can a construction worker work from home, a sanitation worker, a domestic worker, a fisherwoman, a bus driver, a delivery worker, a street vendor, a factory worker, a farmer? Who can afford to sit at home and work from home? Who are you imagining to be the population of your own nation states is the fundamental question here. So this so-called austerity is not austerity for the rulers. It is another lockdown imposed on the working poor. So that's my third integral point here. So the same government that is asking ordinary people to sacrifice fuel, gold, mobility, I don't know who can afford to buy gold, sacrifice fuel and mobility, spend approximately USD 630 million on advertisements between 2014, when Mr. Narendra Modi came in as the Prime Minister, to 2025. So this is roughly about 10 plus years that 630 million USD has been spent on advertisements, which means almost 160,000 USD per day. Austerity, let's call it. Modi's foreign trips between 2015 and 25 cost us around USD 80 million. The Central Vista, or this new Parliament House that has been constructed, while the old Parliament House was very well intact, the redevelopment project alone now stands at an approximately 1.39 billion US dollars. So while workers are asked to tighten their belts, power continues its spectacle. As we just saw, our Prime Minister was really having a good time in Italy. The contradiction becomes sharper in the corporate instances, for example, the Adani case. The US Justice Department was reportedly close to dropping criminal fraud charges against Gautam Adani, the head of the Adani Corporation, which I think is globally known. I don't need to introduce Adani Corporation now, thanks to the last 15, 20 years of the regime. So they're supposedly close to dropping criminal fraud charges against Gautam Adani linked to these alleged bribery around solar contracts in the United States. Reuters actually reported that Adani had publicly committed almost 10 billion USD in US investments and promised 15,000 jobs after Trump's victory. They also reported that Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani agreed to settle related SEC civil proceedings without admitting any wrongdoing, while the Adani group continues to deny all allegations, of course. Legally, one must be cautious, but politically, the pattern is very difficult to ignore. When a corporate empire deeply intertwined with the Indian ruling establishment faces major allegations abroad and discussions of investment, diplomacy, and legal relief unfold simultaneously, I think the ordinary people are entitled to ask who pays for this model of crony capitalism? Who pays for the ports, the coal projects, the infrastructure corridors, debt, ecological destruction, and political protection given to these corporations? So the people pay, the planet pays, so that we all know. The war in West Asia is, in that sense, not only an economic war, it is a climate war, which is my fourth integral point here. There was a recent One Earth study, I think Russia mentioned this earlier, the other element of this. But it estimated that the Israel-Gaza war generated around 33 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. The Guardian reported that the emissions from the first months of the Gaza assault exceeded the annual emissions of many climate vulnerable countries. So this is not a collateral damage. It has to be recognized and called out as an ecocide. War burns carbon in many ways. We all know that. First, of course, it does through direct military emissions, the jets, the drones, the missiles, aircraft carriers, tanks, and logistics. Second, through the destruction that it causes, roads, ports, homes, hospitals, power plants, oil facilities, nuclear facilities, all of those. Third, through reconstruction. And this has to be understood because this has been an essential part of US economic game plan in the last 4 decades, if you look at it closely, because it comes through cement, steel, diesel machinery, rubble removal, all of those. And it is the US corporations that takes the tenders for this. But fourth, through the energy substitution. And this is where I think Friends of the Earth International must take note of, and friends must take note of this. When LNG routes collapse, coal returns. When shipping routes get militarized, transport becomes longer, dirtier, and much more carbon intensive. And this has been part and parcel of the plan. This is not a collateral damage. So, we all know that militaries are among the world's largest institutional emitters, yet military emissions remain hidden or exempted in climate negotiations. The same governments lecturing the global south on coal and consumption refuse to account for the carbon cost of aircraft carriers, bombing campaigns, and military bases. So this is climate hypocrisy at an imperial scale. For South Asia, the impact is immediate. As I mentioned, oil shocks raise food prices, fertilizers prices rise because industrial agriculture depends on fossil fuels. Diesel prices hit fishing, farming, transport, all of the above. LNG disruptions destabilize electricity for all sorts of people, but mostly the poor. Debt rises, IMF pressure intensifies, World Bank pressure intensifies, austerity follows. And as always, the burden falls on workers, women, migrants, fisher people, Dalits, Adivasis, and informal labor. So this is why I'm saying that FoEI must clearly say that anti-war politics is climate politics. Anti-imperialism stands are about climate justice. Palestine solidarity is ecological justice. So is solidarity with Iran. So the history of the world wars proves this. The First and Second World Wars were called world wars not only because Europe fought them, but because colonies fed them. Indian soldiers died in imperial trenches. Asian and African resources financed European armies. Colonized peasants paid for wars they never chose. So modern America has perfected this arrangement. It wages external wars. It has never fought a war in its home front, but not on its own soil. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Palestine, Iran. The battlefield is always elsewhere. The rubble is elsewhere. The poisoned land is elsewhere. The refugees are elsewhere. So our demands should be precise, and I conclude with these points. We have to stop the Zionist war on Palestine. We have to stop the US-Israel war on Iran. We have to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, of course, through diplomacy, not militarization and military coercion. Count military emissions in climate negotiations. And I think this has to become an integral part of every ecological environmental organization globally. Demand reparations for ecological destruction in Palestine, Iran, and all war-affected regions. And that cost of reparations must be borne by those who caused the war and initiated it. Build an Asia-Pacific peace position independent of the US imperial strategy. Reject these so-called austerity measures imposed on the poor to pay for wars and crony capitalism. Defend the global south from oil shocks, food shocks, debt shocks, and climate shocks created by wars we did not choose. The planet is not only warming, it is being militarized. So, and I conclude with this, that and unless we confront the military-industrial fossil fuel complex, climate justice will remain incomplete. From Gaza to Iran, from Hormuz to South Asia, the message is clear. The struggle for peace is the struggle for the planet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gautana.
Thank you, Vijayan. I think that's another, since we are running out of time, I won't say too much, but maybe to pick up on one point, I think, which is extremely important, is that, as Friends of the Earth Asia Pacific and Friends of the Earth International, we talk about a people's internationalist solidarity, from the peoples of the world to peoples of the world. So it's not interstate, because we go beyond this, that kind of only state analysis, that imperialism, how it is functioning with the elites, with the global capitalist class, with corporate power. This is part of our analysis, to impose costs on the working peoples of the world, to impose this precarity through austerity measures, through all the things that Vijayan was saying. And when you talk about the impacts of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on increasing coal, but also other false solutions, nuclear, biofuels, they are all on the rise now as answers to this energy crisis. But even in places where the answer is renewable energy, I think it is as justice movements, we need to go beyond just the question of renewable energy, but also ask renewable energy for who, how, And for what type of energy? Who is going to benefit from these? All these are questions that actually closely link with the energy crisis. There's just so much. We probably have to have a lot of follow-up webinars to pick up on so many of the points, incredible points that the speakers have made, but I don't want to lose time now. So I will move on to a bit of an analysis from Southeast Asia, from the research coordinator at Friends of the Earth Indonesia, Walhi, Wahyu Ekta Setiawan. And please, Wahyu, go ahead if you are with us. I hope. Is Wahyu here? Maybe I'll switch just so, because maybe
Hello,
there's an issue
Kirtana.
with the hi Wahyu. Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah.
Welcome.
Because I'm still not can started my video because the host disabled. So
No, just a minute. Kelly, could you
Oh.
give Wahyu the host status, then we can have them on video. Okay, it should be okay now. Could you turn on your
Okay.
video now?
Good. Thank you, Kirtana.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. At first, we would like to sincerely apologize that Jerry Evan Sembiring, our director, is unable to attend this occasion due to the travel commitments and constraints that make it impossible for him to be present. Therefore, on his behalf, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Wahyu Eka. Now I'm in National Executive of Walhi, and I will be representing him for this session. Thank you for your understanding. Today, I would like to share a perspective about the future, reclaiming future from extractive capitalism that relate with this topic. Because at the same times, I want to situate this discussion with a broader global context of solidarity and justice, including with the people that operated actually in Palestine and the other world, especially from Cuba and Venezuela and the people that oppressed by the imperialism power. The struggle for ecological justice is inseparable from struggles against occupation, dispossession, and systemic exploitation. And across different regions, we saw how control over the land, natural resources, and livelihood is deeply tied to power, inequality, and geopolitics. And Indonesia is currently facing what we call a triple planetary crisis: the deforestation, climate change, and pollution. Since 1998, uh, around 31.9 million hectares of forest land have been handed over to corporation. This is the legacy of new order of dictator Suharto. And between 21 until 20 and 24, the country has lost approximately 22 million tons of hectare of tree cover. This means that more than the football field of forests disappear every minutes. At the same time, existing extractive permit could release up to 9 billion tons of carbon emission, equivalent to about 2 decades of emission from national energy sector. In addition, Indonesia is experiencing severe pollution with people consuming at average of 13 grams of microplastic per month, one of highest of level globally. This crisis is not accidental. They are a result of deliberate political and economic choice. The dominant model driving the situation is extractive capitalism, and economic system that externalize environmental and social costs. The development is often framed as a progress, yet in practices, it prioritizes resources extraction over human well-being and ecological balance. Control over land and natural resources is concentrated in hand of a small political and corporate elite we call oligarchy. While legal frameworks are frequently designed to facilitate capital accumulation rather than to protect community and ecosystem. This is part of political that we face in Indonesia, that we face of decline of democracy. This system is also reinforced by global political and economic arrangements. For example, so-called reciprocal trade agreement between Indonesia and United States, including those involving often deepen dependency of extractive industry, such as mining and large-scale resource exploitation. It's not only US. We depending with European Union and also depending with Japan and China. This is part of the big player in Indonesia that make exploitation in our natural resources. And the extractive industry, such as a mining and large-scale resource exploitation, and rather than strengthening sovereignty, this agreement, maybe back to the reciprocal agreement, can open pathway for external control over natural wealth, making a country like Indonesia more vulnerable and structurally dependent within the global economy. The crisis situation in Indonesia is part of the global context and deep. We are more dependent with the global market, especially when the Hormuz Strait closed. We face fossil fuel crisis, and we face the plastic crisis that involving with our poor people that consume more fossil fuel and consume more plastic for the small enterprise and maybe the labor and the small people that effect of the global crisis, because we are more depend with fossil fuel. Within this context, many of solutions being promoted today is so misleading, especially to answer the economic crisis in Indonesia or answer the renewable energy. Nickel downstreaming for electric vehicle, for instance, is presented as part of green transition, but it drive deforestation, damage a small island, and destroy coastal ecosystem, also the local communities and indigenous people. And large-scale food estate program led to forest clearing, peatland degradation, and displacement indigenous community. Example in Papua. Papua is part of uh, the historical exploitation from Freeport, and now we face the palm oil extraction and make grab of the forest and the indigenous people land. So we face many challenges in Indonesia, especially in Papua, that a natural forest now being part of extraction of large-scale economic part of food estate, bioenergy, and also the mining. And we face the carbon trading scheme, commodity nature, and often undermine a local right. This is an example of what we describe a false solution of form of green capitalism. And at the same time, discussion of on peace and governance, including in initiatives such as regional port of peace that Indonesia included the port of peace involving actors from Southeast Asia, including Indonesia and Thailand, must also critically address ecological justice. peace cannot be separated from environmental justice. Without addressing inequality, resource control, and environmental degradation, peace framework risks become symbolic rather than transformative. And what is needed instead of real solution grounded in ecological justice? This includes building on energy system that is fully renewable and controlled by community. We want back a community as a solution. It ensuring that food system are sustainable and socially involving recognized indigenous people, right to territories, and ensuring full implementation of the principle of free, prior, and informed consent in all development process. And at the same time, it's important to recognize that alternative already exists in practices. Through WALHI models, more than 1.1 million hectare and of land across 28 provinces or regional in Indonesia are currently managed by community, supporting over 161 households. This approach prioritizing securing land right, strengthening collective management of resources, valuing indigenous ecological knowledge, and providing legal and organizational support to community. It demonstrates that community-based governance is only viable but also effective and sustainable. This is part of our solution. The people manage area or the community can independent to manage their area. And uh, however, advancing ecological justice also means recognizing the risk forced by those of frontline environmental defenders across the region are increasingly subjected in criminalization, legal harassment, violence, and digital attack. I tell about our situation in Indonesia that we struggle and that we protest. We face the criminalization. We face the problem of law and legal harassment. Ensuring legal justice, therefore, also require protecting civic space, guaranteeing the right and safety and defend our environment. We also demand the government to protect our uh, because the constitution give a mandate to protect the people. In conclusion, ecological justice is not only about protecting nature, it's about protecting people, securing right, and ensuring a livable future for the next generation. It's also standing in solidarity with global struggle against dispossession and injustice. The current crisis call for urgent action and systemic change rooted in fairness and sustainability. Thank you. This is our argument from Indonesia. I hope all my friends in front of the earth can understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Vayu. That is, yeah, again, I don't want to lose time for our last speaker, but I think an incredibly important perspective, which is that we have all of us that I know that there are an incredible number of existing grassroots solutions for community management of resources, community control, ownership, deployment to people's rights as a defense mechanism against militarism, but also as these people who are the first line of defense against these kind of large-scale infrastructure projects or corporate projects. So yeah, that is another side to get into, but I don't want to lose time for our last speaker, who is Samantha Castro from Friends of the Earth, Australia, but also representing the Gender Justice and Dismantling Patriarchy Working Group of Friends of the Earth International, because we believe that grassroots anti-capitalist feminism still remains one of the most powerful answers to all the description of what we have been seeing of the systemic violence of colonialism and imperialism and patriarchy. So, Sam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kirtana, and thank you to all the speakers. So much of what I was going to touch on has already been covered quite in depth by each speaker. I do want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the stolen Wurundjeri lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations here in so-called Australia. That colonization is an ongoing project in this country, and resistance has been ongoing for over 200 years. I do want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also acknowledge that colonialism is alive and well for our neighbors, both in the Pacific and Southeast Asia and Asia, including West Papua, and of course the Kanaki in New Caledonia, so-called New Caledonia. These struggles are ongoing, and I come from a country that has been founded on the concept of terra nullius. I was recently reminded by the husband of one of the flotilla participants returned to this country that terra nullius is very similar to the Israeli occupying forces concept of a land without a people for a people without a land. So I want to acknowledge that much of what we confront in relationship to empire is built on mythology, stories, and structures that infiltrate every level of our societies across not only the Asia Pacific, but the world. Australia in particular has been tied both to the British Empire and now to the US Empire, particularly since the end of World War II, and we continue to be integrated into interoperability for Washington and the US and Israeli forces who are currently wreaking havoc for our dear friends in Palestine. I guess what I want to talk about today is briefly Australia's role in the current genocide, but all illegal wars of aggression that the US has waged, not only in Palestine, but Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran, and participated through our interoperability and bases such as Pine Gap, in the bombing of Pakistan, Yemen, many countries across our region. So I guess it's become impossible for me recently to view the US empire other than through a feminist lens because of the incredible gendered violence that we've been witnessing not only in our own societies and in our own governments and policies by our governments, but of course in relationship to Palestine and many wars waged where Australia has participated in. It seems that Australia has entered a new era where we have decided that the continuation of the fossil fuel resource extraction of Indigenous lands here in Australia can only be extended or boosted by turning our manufacturing into a war economy. I think the most concerning thing for me is there are 74 companies that are part of the global supply chain just for the F-35 in Australia, and that's not including supply chains around fuel, around other supplies that keep the occupying forces both in the West Bank and Gaza operating. The scary thing around how this manufacturing is being integrated into our society is it is very patriarchal. It is talking about creating mums and dads opportunities to run factories and to make small components like hinges or actuators that just sound like they're part of an aeroplane. But here where I live in Naarm, also known as Melbourne, in Australia, there are 2 or 3 companies that are integral to the capacity to drop bombs on Palestinians or to drop bombs anywhere else in the world where F-35s are being used. So it feels like our government has tried to sell the future prosperity of Australia either on resource extraction or in making machines that have no other purpose than to kill and maim other women and children and working class families in other parts of the world. So the entire nature of the economy that's been created to me has this patriarchal structure, this nuclear family structure, playing to the role of a transition in manufacturing and maybe away from some fossil fuels while needing more of others. And I started thinking about that recently when I knew that this webinar was happening. And I started thinking about the way the war economy has been integrated not only in weapons manufacturing, but also in jobs in surveillance and national security, the integration of data centers. Palantir has not only infiltrated government bodies, but also, into the food supply chain through one of our largest supermarket basically duopoly in Australia. So the implications of empire and militarism can be seen across all sectors of Australian society. It's present in our universities, in our research programs, recruitment, cadetships through private schools, and of course through the militarization of our police force and the response to the pro-Palestinian anti-genocide activism and movements in our country that are being increasingly repressed by state. And this is happening simultaneously with the rise of the far right around the world and in the US empire. Another noted example of how repression works in this country is the cultural cancelling of many Palestinian artists. People in this country have lost their jobs for protesting the genocide in Gaza. And in general, there is heavy repression if anyone goes near the US consulate in any capital city in this country. So we're up against a great deal of repression, but we're also complicit. We are, in my opinion, aiding and abetting. And of course, we have the elephant in the room that is Pine Gap. Pine Gap is also part of a process that has targeted our own citizens, Zomi Frankum, who was murdered. It's very, very likely that the geolocation for that and many other drone operations throughout the Middle East are being triangulated through Pine Gap. So we are integrated into the US war machine and therefore the empire. And all forms of resistance currently in Australia are being met with institutionalized and government repression. So we still have more privilege to protest than in many other countries, and we continue to do so and to look for ways to disrupt our government's complicity in the supply chain of weaponry. But I want to come back to talking about the feminist perspective of this and understanding that all war is patriarchy and all authoritarian regimes are built on patriarchal behavior. The sexual violence that we've seen documented both on civil society through the Epstein files and rape websites, global rape websites, is one thing. But to see sexual violence being used as a weapon of war, which my understanding was sexual violence as a weapon of war has been outlawed in international law. And I think that this actually just points to strengthening my feeling that we are all in an abusive relationship. For anyone that has ever experienced violence and oppression at the hands of a patriarchal person or institution, the red flags are not missable. And we can see that individual women's experiences across the world are now being replicated in global politic and military operations. And this to me is deeply concerning because how do we dismantle and resist empire when the very tools that they use locally and regionally against us and in our own homes and families and communities can't be addressed? And I think that this is where we need to understand the red flags of oppression that is coming from the US empire. And we are very much being gaslit, as Kurtana mentioned earlier. We are being treated as if our response to genocide is somehow inappropriate or racist or anti-Semitic around the world and by global north as well as in the south. And I think we need to recognize that this behavior is very patriarchal, and feminism not only offers ways to resist it politically and ideologically, and in terms of where we center our struggle, but also demonstrates what happens when such violent domination is left unchecked in our communities. I know we're running out of time, so I will skip some of what I was going to speak to. But I think, yeah, it's really important to understand that when we talk about resisting empire, we can talk about geopolitics and the machinations of US military and foreign policy. But the behavior that is being expressed by US and Israel in their quest for domination, not only in the region, but around the world, is something that is very familiar to women around the world. There is no negotiating with this, and perhaps we need to question our approach to tackling imperialism. It feels so huge and insurmountable when we talk about stopping war or ending imperialism. But if we trace the behavior from the global back to the local, we can see that it is women and children and the most vulnerable communities that suffer first and foremost, and that are also used as coercive control in communities and globally by countries and empires. And this brings me to talking about how the Pacific region is often not included in discussion, and yet as one of the most climate vulnerable regions of the world, it is also a region that holds matriarchal cultures whose entire islands, such as Tuvalu, are being flooded and going underwater with sea level rising, displacing matriarchal cultures and leaving them with nowhere to hold sovereignty and autonomy over themselves and their communities. And this is just one example of many within our region where we are seeing patriarchal violence escalated from on the streets towards protesters to corporations and government authorities and armies. So what do we do? What is the solution? Have we succeeded in our battle to halt the far right, climate change, and imperialism with our current approach? And I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions around all of those things and consider the ways that the local is now the global. Just as there is no way to disentangle the global economy and the local economy from the impacts of climate change, there is no way to disentangle the patriarchal domination of the current dominant empire and hegemony from the local experience of women and marginalized communities. So we need to tackle resistance with also feminist solutions. And as Kurtana also mentioned earlier, and I feel like I'm repeating things that have been said, I do think that this requires not just thinking about a just transition, but a just feminist transition. And what does that mean? It means thinking about the working class women. It's about healthcare, education, childcare, aged care, instead of warfare. And to get to the point of reparation and repair, as Rasha mentioned, we need peace. And to get to climate justice, We need gender justice, and we need economic justice, and we need justice for First Nations people from Palestine to here in Australia. So I would ask everyone to consider how we as a region can find commonalities that express and push back against the supply chains of patriarchal imperialism, but also how we can do that work with each other and in our local communities, because we cannot dismantle imperialism without dismantling its tools of oppression in our local, regional, national spaces. So thank you, and hopefully we can talk more about that.
Thank you, Sam. Yes. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Sam. That is and you know, there's so many things, yeah, again, that resonated, which is that, you know, we do talk about these big structure systems of oppression, as we call them: capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, but all of them operate also at all levels. You know, they operate within our movements, they operate at the national level, they operate at regional, they operate, you know, in a world capitalist system, reinforcing each other, and we can only fight them by working together at all the different levels. And the feminist lens is not, it's not only for feminists. That's what you know, as Sam said, it's a lens that we all have to be using in our work, as it is a very, very powerful liberatory lens that shows us different ways of organizing the world, different ways of organizing what is feminist economies, for example, for a just transition. So I know we've already spent about an hour and a half and people are starting to drop off, but I do want to give just, if people can be around for another 10 minutes, give a chance to any of you who have been in this webinar, who are also doing incredible work from many different regions in Asia Pacific, to either ask questions, or if you have short interventions you would like to share, posing some questions, some answers, please, I invite you to do so. As many people have said in this webinar, we are only powerful together if we have these discussions, if we kind of do our strategies, our joint work together. So it's really important to hear from all of you. Please don't be shy. So I open the floor now for anybody who would like to ask a question or make a contribution. Yes, please.
Good to know there's a hand being raised.
Yeah. Sorry. Why can I not? Umo, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for this great conversation. I think it is timely that this is coming up. My name is Sumoy Swaiko. I'm the coordinator, Peace Point Development Foundation. We are environmental justice group or NGO working in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. I think I have listened keenly to all the presenters. I've come to a conclusion that all the corporate bodies have same templates everywhere they operate. And they seem to operate with impunity. And our government, especially what we are observing here in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, are all about they are interested in the resources. They are not interested in the welfare of the communities. So they collaborate with the oil companies against the frontline communities. I think it's high time for us to come up with more synergy and how to resist this. Let's see how we can also develop a template that can also be used globally to resist these movements. If not, we will not be able to save our environment and keep for the next generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If it's okay, I'm going to take a few questions and then summarize so that the panel can go, since we're a bit short on time. I hope that's okay. I would really love to invite also any of our wonderful women activists in the audience to raise your hand and ask a question. Pierre, please go ahead. Sorry, Pierre, we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, now.
Okay, yes. Now, yes. Now,
yes.
Yep, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, so it's just an invitation or a question to FoE people. This is a FoE webinar about how they relate to the idea of social forum, because this is a place where this is an open space for encounters where they can propose online activities, physical activities, hybrid activities, where to disseminate views, make exchange, build articulation. So there is the Asia-Pacific Social Forum, and there is also Intersection Social Forum, and there is also World Social Forum in Africa. So maybe there is some comments on that from FoE people in that webinar. I know, for instance, Sarat Shelor is involved in the Asia-Pacific Social Forum and using the mutual visibility spaces provided by the process to disseminate ideas from FoE, etc. So it's just a question to them about how they intend to participate, use this tool space process that is proposed for counter-hegemonic conversations and more, because the activity is not just about talking, it can be about strategizing, it can be popular university, it can be strategic incubator. So many uses can be done proactively. So that's my question.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 questions in the chat and nothing more. Okay, so that's four questions. I think that's quite enough. And maybe I'll just remind the speakers quickly of what the questions are in case you didn't write it down. And then I can maybe give each of you just a minute or so. Sorry, I'm very sorry about that. But as always. Oh, we do have from Sergio. Okay, amazing. A very relevant question also from Sergio. 1 second, I will put it in my list. So that's 5 points. So maybe you have more than a minute each, 2 minutes. So there's one very relevant question about how do we tackle corporate power, which continues unchecked and actually is growing, as we know, and in collusion with many of our governments. And how do we build an international movement, a global strategy to to oppose this kind of the rise of corporate power. The second is on the World Social Forum as a space and how we can use that. And I think I would expand this also to other spaces, possibly. There's not only the World Social Forum, but how do we use the spaces that exist to us? And maybe linked to that, there's a question from Chloe, which is, after 71 years, is it time for another Bandung spirit? Is it even possible in the current political climate? How do we recenter decolonization? And this is very relevant because, as we know, there are some attempts among some allies to reinvigorate the discussion of Bandung. So I think it's very important for us to hear from our Indonesian colleagues, but also others who recently, I think, hosted a conference. Do we see this as an avenue for a future space for solidarity? Then there are 2 more questions. One is from Maju. how do we build solidarities in our region to question and challenge how corporations and the US and to challenge corporate and US Israeli domination? That's again very linked to the question from Sergio, which is more specific but along the same lines. How do we amplify the boycott, disinvestment, sanctions movement? Which is one answer, in fact, to Maju's question, isn't it? How do we build solidarities? So I hope that's clear. I don't think the speakers have to feel you have to address all 5 questions. Of course, you can do the ones that are more relevant or you are taking. So if I can pass on, maybe we go in reverse order. Is that fair, Sam? Or is that, yeah? Okay. So can I please pass to Sam first? A few minutes to answer the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I see the how do we challenge and build solidarity and challenge corporate power in the BDS as interconnected. And I think this is about what I was trying to say about the interoperability of countries like Australia, corporations like Albert Systems, and other, as Mina spoke about, other top 10 weapons dealers moving into our region, sneaking into our suburbs and funding, our nuclear families' income for the future. It really requires us to identify the interconnected corporations throughout our region that we could potentially target together because they are wreaking havoc in all of our countries. Albert Systems is also in multiple partnerships with other weapons companies and fossil fuel entities, companies like Adani, of course. Is connected to Albert Systems as well. So I think it's about understanding the supply chain goes right back to the critical minerals, to the coal, all the way along. And we can identify those corporations and those contracts between our governments and entities. On the flip side of that, the solution is looking at resistance is not just about resisting corporations and governments participating in destruction and death. It's about trying to reappropriate those resources to support the commonality of the working class across the region, much of which is feminized, gendered labor and industry. And it's about recognizing that our allies lay in feminist movements, in refugee movements, in social justice movements, not just focused on environmental action, that we must show up for each other. And that's the way we build it locally and then regionally. And I think for the region, a focus around demilitarization and decolonization, to return to repair and reparation and life-centered economies and societies is a leap that is beyond just holding corporations to account. It's about being prepared to do the work to build, cooperative models, not-for-profit models that sit outside institutions but lay with the grassroots and the workers in our communities where we have sovereignty and autonomy. I'll leave it there. I could say a lot more, but the social forum sounds really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. I will move now on to Wayu. Sorry, I'm just sorry,
Hello.
Wayu, before you reply, I just want to point to 2 more questions that have come in on the chat. I'm sorry, we keep adding more things to your list. But from Jeffrey Matthews, there's a question in the chat, and also from Evita. In case you can take that, please. Maybe the future speakers can have a quick read of those 2. Okay,
Sure,
thank you.
sure.
Wayu, please go ahead.
Oh, Jeffrey, the island of activism. No. Similar and similar sometimes some extractive entities, so we can find more. Okay. From the chat, Kirtana, right?
Yeah, but don't worry. Maybe the future speakers can do it. You can go ahead with your response just now. And I'm just alerting if anybody else who's on the list can have a look at these. Yeah, don't worry. Thank you, Wayu.
Okay. Maybe I want to response maybe a question from the Kirtana of or the solidarity in the context, and maybe mention of Bandung Declaration, the Bali solidarity to confront the corporate power, maybe draw inspiration from Bandung Declaration that which emphasize a collective resistance, self-determination, and cooperation upon oppressed nation. In today's context, this mean movement, communities, and civil society must unite across the sector scales to counter concentrate the economic power. And solidarity today is not just symbolic; it must be practical and organized, like our experience now. But Indonesia now face the declaration democracy and not being part of the non-bloc countries movement. But we requires a shared understanding that injustice is structural, not isolated. The communities affected by corporate harm, whether from system, extractive industry, and capitalism, need to connect their struggle, build alliance, speaks with collective voices. This include linking grassroots group, NGOs, researchers, and even a reform-minded insider. Or we can connect with the other. We can connect with all people and focus on why the grassroots movement can be built and can be more expanding the grassroots and connecting to each other. And the current context, solidarity must adapt that corporation operate globally. So resistance must also be networked and strategic. This is solidarity, so center frontline communities, ensuring they lead and not just participate. So uh, 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 we should push the community, local community, to maybe to have their voices and connecting to each other. And also Friends of the Earth is a hub or is a part of can help the communities to connecting to each other, especially Indonesia, connected to Asia Pacific, connected to international. This is my point. And about the activism or in Allen is of fighting the same extractive system, but remain disconnected, making them easier is to overwhelm. The challenge is not just coordination, but learning to move together without losing autonomy. And the point is how we learn about the people struggle, learn how we can strengthen the people, and how we can up our voices. Maybe make the connection of the people is important to us in this era or in these years. Thank you. Maybe this is my response about the connecting to each other, especially in grassroots. And also we want to build more power, also especially in a political context, to tackle or dismantle the corporation power or dismantle the imperialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Wahyu. Okay, I'm going to move swiftly on, maybe to Vijayan, because there are
Thank you.
more questions coming now.
Thank you,
in the
Gatana.
chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
So broadly, if I am to look at three of the questions that came in the chat, the question is also, how do we look at new resistance itself? We have a lot of examples around. I would actually ask the question of, is defiance an acceptable frame for us? Ecological defiance, for instance, the Friends of the Earth India is going to hold our next General Council, the National General Council of the Friends of the Earth India, with many organizations joining it on this theme of ecological defiance, and also to talk about who are the real climate warriors at a time when, from corporates to everyone who caused, the World Banks, the IMFs, everyone who caused the crisis itself is suddenly putting on the cassock of the saints who are here to rescue us from all of this crisis and to build through solutions. So I just leave it at that because it is a collective question. I don't want, because then it's a whole together different conversation. Now, when we look at how do we support or mobilize movements like BDS, I think it's a very, very relevant introspection that has to, it has to be a retrospective interrogation for the civil society uh, uh, and resource-based activism across the world. And I do see even in countries like India, there are thousands of young people who have actually come into these networks without the loud and visible civil society being there. And I think that speaks volumes about how do we look at ourselves, retrospectively, but introspectively too, interrogating ourselves. What is the kind of role that civil society has been playing in the actual defiance and the resistance perspective? Uh, you know, Thanks, Jeffrey, for that question on islands of activism. They are about youth and women, but then the question of youth is not just about ageism. It's not just about holding on to the bar of under 35 or under 30 and things like that. It is about the spirit, those who are keeping the spirit of rebellion, resistance, defiance on. So it is about people who have those in their systems and are able to romanticize it and fight for it. I mean, that is why the Che Guevaras and the Mao Zedongs and sometimes Ambedkars and the Gandhis also become very, very important in that from our perspective. And that's why you do see movements like in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh or in Nepal or even the cockroach party that you're seeing against a very tyrannical regime, a terrorizing regime like in India. You are seeing a party calling itself the Cockroach Janta Party, Cockroach People's Party. And it's actually coming up in a way that, it has crossed 2 million followers on social media, etc. Satirically challenging and devastating attack on the entire structure of the democratic state that you have artificially built around majoritarianisms. And I think that was the spirit in Sri Lanka that I saw in Bangladesh similarly. I'm not saying that these regime changes have produced revolutionary governments, not at all. I'm saying that these rebellious movements are indeed very, very important and important to note in history as analysts and as civil society actors. Because historically recognizing resistance is and communities is at the center. Uh, so when it comes to campaigns and questions of how do we align ourselves more and things like that, I'm thinking that the CSOs need to also look at, like when I was making a presentation, I made a critique about how the nation state is looking at who is the audience, who are the people, who is your population, who are your citizens. I think the civil society organizations need to ask ourselves the question about who is our audience too. Are we also becoming increasingly, and I'm being very, very self-critical in saying this, secretariat-based organizations in different big cities that are based out of those with, social media operations or, comms as we call it, and trying to reach out through social media to, a new clientele as we see it? Or are we also still amidst the people? And I think that's a very, very critical question, because if we are still amidst the people, the women are in defiance, the women are in resistance in many of these communities, and they are shaping and taking the lead in that rebellion. And that will be a point not to miss. And I think that is one thing that I want to say. And the last point on Evita's question on debt and oil shocks, there is absolutely nothing new in the debt or the oil shocks. It has been a continuing pathway of global imperialist capitalism to drive it into the debt shocks and the oil shocks. But the point that I was trying to make was also that the capitalism takes a very, very convenient view when it comes to adjusting itself against a theory of no permanent enemies currently, because it is unlike in the days of the 1980s till the late 80s, when there was a two block global order, one defending capitalism, another defending communist socialist framework. Today, that is a non-existent reality. And the Russias and the Chinas are building new imperialist camps within that framework of capitalism is important to recognize and speak about. And that is why the quick readjustment that US administration and Trump does when it comes to India on oil shocks, allowing India to buy oil from Russia, which Indian authorities then flaunt as if it's their great negotiating capacity that they got the Russian oil back so that our price rise is not immensely high. Now, this is where that game is being played, and that is a continuous game, a game in continuity. But at the same time, let us not miss the trees for the forest. I mean, I think it's important to understand that this is a global imperialist regime that is basing itself credibility, giving itself credibility on the basis of militarization and war, making it fashionable on a day-to-day basis while the people suffer. And there it's important to understand who are our real enemies in that war. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijayan and Rasha, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about building solidarity in the regions and how to amplify BDS movement. So I think building solidarity today requires not only symbolic support. Rather, we need to start working on long-term political relations and coordinated actions together. So one important step is recognizing that many struggles across the regions are connected through the same systems: militarization, corporate power, environmental destruction, colonial domination. So solidarity should not be based on reacting to a specific crisis, for example, but on building a sustained movement, a sustained relationships across the regions. So this can mean sharing our political analysis, supporting each other's campaigns across the regions, exchanging strategies, and connecting the grassroots movements. So I also think that in terms of amplifying the BDS movement, I think one of its strengths, the BDS movement, is that it gives people concrete mechanisms for solidarity and accountability. So it's not just talking about symbols and so on. No, it gives us concrete action that we can do, and it also connects the grassroots action to broader structural issues. So including corporate complicity, militarization, resource extraction, and economic systems. And these all sustain occupation and apartheid. And to strengthen the BDS regionally and internationally, we can connect to the campaigns, to local struggles against corporate abuse and activism, and build stronger climate justice and environmental justice alliances, and to continue documenting the corporate complicity in occupation and militarization. And I think the environmental and climate movements, they have a very important role here. Many corporations involved in militarization, infrastructure control, and extraction of globally infrastructure control, they operate globally and across different regions. So accountability campaigns can also become space for international coordination. And finally, the solidarity must remain grounded in affected communities themselves. And the most meaningful solidarity is not only speaking for people and not only speaking about people, but trying to organize with them, to listen to the frontline communities, and to build collective struggles across the regions and across the borders and across the countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Meena ji, and I'm just going to request you to have a look also at the last three questions which I think are kind of interconnected, which is on kind of debt crisis and oil shocks, and their kind of history, the history and the global nature of austerity as a context and as a measure in fiscal policy, and also understanding debt as the absence of welfare as well. And maybe I think social protection. I don't know if that's what's meant by the question. Thank you, Meenat.
You are asking me to have a half an hour seminar. I can't do it. So no, just on a serious note, I think all the questions are very important, and I don't think we can answer all of them. And I think what this webinar has managed to do is actually to raise the spotlight on imperialism, because the current context of where we are is quite different from where many of us were a few years ago. All the work that all of us have been doing, whether on corporate accountability, on even in Friends of the Earth, in terms of resisting, neoliberalism. We have action plans, we have strategies, we have connections, but I think this moment now is a different moment, and I think we need to. First, the point I want to say is we all know how to do work and struggle, but I think what we are now facing is a new level of complexity that we need to bring in on top of what we are already doing. And so this is one way of saying that it's quite complex, but also important. So maybe I just want to focus on some areas where we need to do more work on at this juncture in time. And that is the point that some of us have been raising in terms of the new kinds of trade agreements which are being foisted by the US administration. I talked about the agreement on reciprocal tariffs. Now, why are these important? Because if we don't resist them, if we don't fight them, then our government policy space is restricted. Then we become subjects of US, we lose our sovereignty totally. We become another state of the United States. So that is why that piece of work is absolutely critical. And I think the more of us who get engaged in fighting these trade agreements with the United States and also at the WTO on what the United States wants to do is something that we need to escalate. I think in Friends of the Earth, we have our trade group working on this, and I think we need to make the connections and do work more. The other is, Kirtana, we spoke about the critical minerals work, and I think you and others already know this. Everywhere, many of our global south countries are saying we need to do much more work on this. So how do we do this in connection to the militarism, and how do we fight that? And I think that's another piece of work. And the US is actually at the moment shaping an agreement on critical minerals, which it will control. So I think one of the things that I'd like to say here, and we have to work as Friends of the Earth and other organizations, is centering the fight on the United States. So, and we need a space, we need another seminar where we have our allies from the United States who come together and we do this analysis together. We do the building blocks there, because the focus now is only on the midterm elections. And they're saying that, the Senate trying to roll back the powers in the Senate or the Congress. And then the point is there's a big fight going on in the Democratic Party, as we know. And so we definitely do need to strengthen the progressive forces in the United States to fight that. And another critical moment this is, and I think this is where the Israel, the war that Israel has mounted and the role of IPEC. Never in the history of the world have we seen more and more global North awareness about IPEC and its complicity with the United States. And more people are getting disenchanted. That's fabulous. And so we need to we need another piece of work that actually spotlights on the Zionist regime and breaks the hold of the United States. So I would actually say that we need a lot of work in the global North right now. Whatever you, I, or others are doing, we will continue to do. But until and unless we have the progressive voices of the global North in the room, look at what's happened in the UK. I mean, for the nightmare, instead of all this realization of what's happening in today's world, you have a right-wing forces which are gaining ground. Why? Why is the right wing gaining ground? And that's because of austerity, the failures of all the policies that we have had so far. Countries have broken down, people have been, the rich become richer, the poor become poorer, and there is no progressive alternative which is being given, and it's everywhere. And for India, maybe that's the last point I will say. It really, we all talk about the Bandung spirit. Where are the leaders? Narendra Modi hugging Netanyahu 2 days before the Israel launched the attack in Iran. I mean, what the hell? And so who is accountable? I think we are all accountable. Our governments are accountable, but I think we need new forms of resistance, new forms of thinking, new forms of organizing. And I think the time is really now. And so if we can get our progressive forces of the North to come together, because I'd like to see what kind of changes we can do together in the global North and to push back the right-wing advance. And I think that we need to do urgently in the next few months. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. So critical minerals, militarism, focus on militarism, and then the digital economy, the dangers of the AI and the new kind of fights that are happening with absolutely no accountability, because you have the nuclear proliferation treaty. Of course, they don't follow that, but who is regulating the new weapons, the new systems which are out of control? So I do think that we need to also work with experts in this area who are following these new forms of war, and we have to end this kind of attacks. So I'd basically say we need to do more and new things at a faster pace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meenaji. I think we are 10 minutes over, but it's amazing, and I think a testament to the brilliance of all the speakers that many of you are still here. So I just want to say that this is a start for us to offer the discussion that we want to have in many different ways. And I won't repeat what Meena has said, but I think one of the things in terms of how we organize is, as many people have said, what we also need in our movements is kind of ideological and political clarity. And that is based on the joint analysis of people's movements, of rural and urban working classes of people's movements, and that is where our analysis comes from. That's where we need to build together. It has to be an intersectional analysis. We don't do identity politics. We don't do liberal politics, but this is where we build from, and we will have to build it together. We have to analyze together the new developments, because there are many, as Meena said. It has implications for labor, for debt, for the environmental crisis. And then I think I can't read it out because of lack of time, but Vayu has put an incredible reply to the discussion on how we build our movements, leaderful movements, as some call it. And, that's what we're trying to build here, a joint responsiveness, that we are kind of in organic networks with each other, that we can learn and we can build in the face of this incredible opposition. But that opposition also is not a monolith. And that is what we know. There are huge cracks in the systems that they are building, huge oppositional forces. AI might be collapsing because of the Strait of Hormuz. We know many things that are going on, right? And we have to find the leverage points in these cracks with our movements and get into them. So thank you so much to all our speakers. I'm actually quite overwhelmed by how brilliant this webinar was, and there's a lot of things to take away. I've been making many notes, as I'm sure all of you have, and look forward to seeing you all again very soon in the next conversation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.